Welcome to the Cheating Confession Reddit channel. Today, I'm going to share with you a real-life cheating story. It will give you a better understanding of the issue of infidelity today and help you be more cautious when it comes to a cheating wife. Let's dive into this story together.
As Daniel steps into the familiar warmth of his home, the comforting rhythm of family life masks the undercurrents of tension he's ignored for far too long. But a chance remark by his daughter shatters the illusion, revealing secrets too devastating to comprehend. Betrayed and blindsided, Daniel embarks on a journey that transforms heartbreak into resilience, leading to a life of rediscovered strength and purpose. This gripping tale of love, loss, and reinvention is a raw exploration of how betrayal can tear us apart, and how we can rebuild stronger than ever. What would you do if your world collapsed in an instant? My dear friend, be sure to subscribe to my channel if this is your first time here, and give your royal like to this video. The evening progressed with a predictability so ingrained it seemed almost rehearsed. Daniel's car eased into the driveway, the soft crunch of gravel blending with the muted ambiance of dusk. Within the house, the rhythms of daily life continued uninterrupted. Faint music spilled from Aurora's room, mingling with the gentle percussion of pots and pans from the kitchen. When Daniel stepped inside, he loosened his tie, the weight of the day hanging heavy on his shoulders. Yet, as the door closed behind him, a sense of familiarity and calm enveloped him. "Hey, babe, dinner in 20. Addison's voice rang out from the kitchen, its warmth a balm against the fatigue of his day. Her tone, steadfast and comforting, was something Daniel had come to rely on. "Thanks, hun," he called back, setting his briefcase by the couch. Leaning against the back of the chair, he caught a glimpse of her by the stove, clad in his favorite apron, a playful keepsake from their last vacation. She hummed softly as she stirred, and the savory aroma wafting through the house stirred both his appetite and an ache of guilt. The distance he'd allowed to creep between them gnawed at him. Work had consumed him lately, leaving little energy for the attentiveness he once prided himself on. He could see its impact, but he wasn't sure how to fix it. "Dad, can you help me with math later?" Aurora's voice called from the hallway, breaking his thoughts. He mustered a weary but genuine smile. "Sure thing, sweetheart," he replied, savoring the small moments that reminded him why he worked so hard. Still, an unease had taken root in him, subtle but insistent. There had been signs, he realized. Addison's smiles often felt incomplete, and Aurora's words carried a faint impatience. He dismissed it all as normal, a teenager's moods, the ebb and flow of a long relationship. They were solid, weren't they? Determined to push the doubts aside, Daniel focused on the promise of a good meal and the comforting presence of family. Later that night, as he walked past Aurora's room, something stopped him. Her door stood ajar, and her voice drifted into the hallway. "No, Stella, my dad is clueless as ever," Aurora said, her tone light but tinged with amusement. Daniel froze, his pulse quickening as he listened. "Mom's boyfriend even drives me to school sometimes in his fancy car," Aurora continued, her words punctuated by a casual laugh. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Mom's boyfriend? The phrase reverberated in his mind, absurd and disorienting. "No way!" came a muffled reply, followed by Aurora's playful giggle. "Yeah, they're just waiting for him to finish paying for my college so they can ditch him and head to Miami." Daniel leaned against the wall, his breath shallow as her words sank in. Loser dad. Waiting to ditch him? Mom's boyfriend. The sentences churned in his mind, leaving him stunned and hollow. "Aurora! Dinner's ready!" Addison's cheerful call from the kitchen shattered the moment. Daniel quickly stepped away from the door, his face blank as he struggled to contain the storm inside. He moved toward the dining room, his steps steady despite the chaos within. When he entered, Addison greeted him with an effortless smile, balancing plates in her hands. "Perfect timing, I was just about to call you," she said brightly. "Aurora, come eat." Aurora strolled in, her phone glued to her hand, barely acknowledging him as she took her seat. Her ease was almost surreal, as if her words minutes earlier hadn't been a bombshell. Daniel forced a tight smile, masking the fire that raged beneath the surface. "Looks delicious, Addison," he said, picking up his fork. "Thanks, honey, it's your favorite," she replied, her tone as warm as ever. But Daniel's eyes searched hers, and for the first time he noticed something off. Her smile was wide, but her gaze seemed distant, the warmth not quite reaching her eyes. Aurora toyed with her food, her focus glued to her phone as she scrolled between distracted bites. "Hey, Dad," she began casually, not bothering to lift her gaze. "I might need a little extra for school this month, just for stuff. Is that okay?" Daniel paused, swallowing hard. "We'll see," he answered, keeping his voice even despite the growing tension inside him. Aurora's eyes flicked up, her expression souring slightly. "Oh, come on! It's not like I'm asking for much," she pushed. "Just a couple hundred." Daniel's tone hardened. "We'll talk about it later." With an exaggerated groan, she rolled her eyes. "Whatever," she muttered. From her spot nearby, Addison chuckled softly, trying to ease the moment. "Teenagers," she said with a light laugh, resting her hand on Daniel's. Her touch sent a sharp pang through him, like a wire pulled too tight. Daniel tightened his jaw, resisting the urge to pull away. Instead, he offered a restrained squeeze of her hand, his exterior calm, though his emotions churned violently beneath the surface. Dinner dragged on, a blur of forced smiles and hollow small talk. Daniel played along, laughing when Addison made a joke, asking Aurora polite questions about her classes. Neither seemed to notice the turmoil brewing within him. As the meal ended, Daniel got up to clear the table. In the kitchen, Addison passed by and leaned in to kiss his cheek. "Thanks for helping," she murmured softly. "Sure," he replied, his tone clipped. She walked off, mentioning something about taking a shower, while Aurora retreated to her room without another word. Left alone in the kitchen, Daniel stared down at the plates piled in the sink, his fists curling tightly, his knuckles blanching. The weight of unspoken anger bore down on him. He wanted to yell, to demand answers to the questions tearing through his mind, but he held back. An outburst would only drive them to denial and excuses. He needed clarity, not confrontation. Switching off the kitchen light, Daniel moved to Aurora's door and knocked lightly. "What?" came her voice, muffled from within. He cracked the door open, finding her on her bed with her phone in hand. "Need any help with homework?" he asked, keeping his tone calm. She blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Yeah, I guess," she answered reluctantly. Daniel stepped in and sat beside her, forcing his attention onto the math problems before them. Each moment was a battle against his shaking resolve, his voice steady only through sheer willpower. "Thanks, Dad," Aurora said when they finished, flashing him a smile that to his dismay seemed sincere. "Anytime," he replied evenly, standing up to leave. As he closed the door behind him, he felt his resolve solidify. This had to end, tonight. The hours stretched on, the house gradually settling into silence. Addison's soft snores carried from their bedroom, and the faint sound of Aurora's music had faded long ago. In the stillness of the living room, Daniel sat hunched over the coffee table, his laptop casting a faint glow across his face. Scattered documents surrounded him like the remnants of a battle he never expected to fight. Each paper, every statement, landed like a blow. They represented years of relentless effort, long hours, missed milestones, sacrifices, dedicated to building a life for his family, the family he thought he knew. Now, it all felt like a facade, hollowed out by betrayal. His hand hovered over a folder, trembling slightly. Forcing himself to steady it, he opened it, exposing the meticulous records of Aurora's college fund. Each line, each figure, told the story of his devotion. He had given everything to secure her future, pouring his soul into every dollar in that account. With a deep breath, he logged into the tuition payment portal, his fingers moving deliberately over the keyboard. The numbers on the screen blurred slightly as he stared at them. Each dollar sign felt like a reminder of the time, energy, and love he had invested. This wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming control over the chaos threatening to unravel everything he had sacrificed for. His fingers moved swiftly, his determination burning brighter than his grief. Enough was enough. With a few precise keystrokes, Daniel canceled the automatic payment. His eyes lingered on the confirmation screen, as though it might reveal some hidden wisdom. The page remained motionless, indifferent to his silent hope. Exhaling slowly, he turned to the next item on his list, their shared bank accounts. His fingers moved with steady purpose, though a creeping coldness spread through him as he reviewed the numbers. Years of savings, emergency funds, mortgage payments, all symbols of their once shared dreams. Deliberately, he moved every dollar into his personal account, checking, savings, every cent. The total was considerable, enough to sustain him for years and construct a new life from the ground up. Yet, despite the liberation each transfer brought, satisfaction eluded him. He wanted more. With determination, he opened the property records, pulling up the details of the house they had bought together, their supposed forever home. Navigating to the mortgage account, he paid off the remaining balance entirely. The house was now solely his. Even so, the act felt hollow. He needed to sever every bond. His next move was clear, a message to the insurance company, removing her name from every policy. No ties, no shared liabilities. As he typed, each word felt like a step closer to release, though the weight in his chest grew heavier with every action. Hours passed in meticulous labor, ensuring that every connection between them was cleanly severed. Finally, the burden of their shared obligations was entirely in his hands. He drafted a brief message, cold and to the point. "Congratulations on your future in Miami. Enjoy it, on your own dime. No flourishes, no sentiment." He had no energy for drawn-out farewells or pointless debates. The divorce papers waited neatly on the table, accompanied by the note. He had prepared for this moment for weeks. Fatigue swept over him, not the exhaustion of physical exertion, but the weariness born of confronting a harsh reality. He rubbed his face and rose from the chair, his gaze drifting toward the hallway. In the bedroom, Addison lay asleep, her back to him. The gentle rhythm of her breathing felt like a foreign sound. The woman he had once loved, trusted above all, had shattered his faith. And Aurora, their daughter, had stood by her side. A sharp knot formed in his throat, his emotions tightening like a vice. There could be no room for hesitation. He moved silently through the house, taking only what he truly needed: clothes, personal belongings, items that were unquestionably his. The rest, the remnants of their life together, he left behind. Slinging a small, pre-packed bag over his shoulder, he resisted the temptation to linger. He wasn't waiting for explanations or apologies. At the dining table, his eyes briefly rested on the papers. A flicker of doubt surfaced but vanished just as quickly. Resolutely, he picked up the documents and the note, carrying them to the front door. His hand paused on the doorknob. This would be the last time he left this house. No turning back, he told himself firmly. The night air greeted him as he stepped outside, crickets chirping faintly in the background. With one final turn of the key, he locked the door behind him, closing off the life he had decided to leave. The car's headlights sliced through the darkness as he drove away, mile after mile, placing a growing distance between him and the past. As the miles rolled by, an unexpected lightness crept in. He was truly alone now, but that was enough. By the time dawn broke, painting the horizon in soft, golden hues, he had arrived somewhere new. The town was peaceful, its streets still in the early morning light. Pulling into the parking lot of a modest motel, he took in its unassuming charm, so far removed from the chaos he had left behind. He planned to stay a night, maybe two. For now, it was enough. A quiet place to gather his thoughts and begin again. He hadn't formulated a strategy, but he craved distance, space to clear his mind and rediscover his breath. When he arrived at the motel, the receptionist hardly acknowledged him, her attention buried in a well-worn book. That indifference didn't bother him. Fading into the background had become second nature. Solitude, once an alien state, had become his sanctuary. The room was stark, almost forgettable. A basic bed, a dated television, and a cramped bathroom. But it wasn't about luxury. It was about escape. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Daniel stared blankly at his phone. His old number was disconnected, his social media erased. Every link to his past had been meticulously severed. The stillness in the room was both suffocating and strangely soothing. After years entangled in lies and betrayal, the quiet felt like a balm to his battered spirit. In that silence, a profound truth surfaced. He was free. Free from the suffocating layers of pretense, free from the labyrinth of deceit. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a flicker of relief warmed him. Though sleep evaded him as the hours stretched on, he welcomed the clarity that came with the sleepless night. He wasn't adrift anymore. He was preparing. With a sharp resolve, Daniel vowed to rebuild his life. This time, he'd move with precision, ensuring that no one saw him coming. Addison woke early, sunlight pouring through the window in golden streaks. She reached instinctively to her side, but her hand touched only cool, empty sheets. The vacant spot jolted her upright. Her heart thudded as she scanned the room, unease tightening her chest with every moment of silence. She moved quickly through the house, calling his name, her voice tinged with an edge of panic. No response. She checked each room, her apprehension growing with each fruitless search. The house was empty, eerily devoid of life. Her breathing quickened as she hurried to Aurora's bedroom. "Aurora, have you seen your father?" Her voice cracked under the weight of dread. Aurora, still groggy, rubbed her eyes in confusion. "What? Isn't he here?" Addison's heart sank further. "He's gone," she managed to whisper, the words sticking in her throat. Aurora blinked slowly, trying to shake off sleep. "Maybe he's at work or something," she mumbled. But Addison knew better. Her instincts screamed the truth. She rushed to the kitchen, desperate for an explanation, her eyes darting wildly. Then she saw it, the divorce papers and a note left on the dining table. Her pulse roared as she picked up the paper, her hands trembling. "Congratulations on Miami. Enjoy it. On your own." She froze, the bitter finality of his words hitting like a physical blow. This was it. Daniel was gone, and he wasn't coming back. Daniel had kept his plans to himself. No confidants, no farewells. He slipped away as a shadow might, leaving no trace of the man he once was. The night he left, he didn't hesitate, didn't falter. There was no room for second thoughts. His resolve was absolute. Piece by piece, he dismantled his old life. Each click deleting a social media account felt like cutting another tether to the past. Changing his phone number was a final step in ensuring no one could reach him. He didn't want to be found. With nothing but a single suitcase and no destination in mind, he drove. The miles blurred together as he passed through nameless towns and faceless cities, the monotony of the journey echoing the hollowness within him. After days of wandering, he stumbled upon a quiet, unassuming town nestled among rolling hills. It was perfect in its anonymity. In this forgotten corner of the world, Daniel began anew. He rented a modest apartment perched above a quaint bookstore and took a job at a small hardware store. The work was monotonous, the pay modest, but it sufficed. It was enough to get by, enough to stay unnoticed. The first months were brutal. No distance could free him from the memories that clung to him, haunting and relentless. Yet Daniel persisted. In this quiet, unremarkable town where no one knew his name or his past, he found the space to begin putting himself back together. Piece by piece, he started to rebuild. No matter how far Daniel tried to escape, the nights always caught him at his most vulnerable. The moment he closed his eyes, Addison's image emerged sharply, while the faint echoes of Aurora's laughter danced in his mind. The sting of betrayal burned deeply within him, an unrelenting reminder of his perceived failure. Over and over he questioned himself. Why? What could I have done to deserve this? The questions clung to him like a shadow. What had gone so wrong? Where had his path veered so sharply, leaving him in this desolation? He replayed the past endlessly, dissecting every detail, the conversations, the subtle changes in tone, the moments that hindsight illuminated so cruelly. He had been so focused on holding his life together that he missed the cracks that had been forming all along. Night after night, he lay awake in an unfamiliar bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Sleep felt like a distant memory, replaced by a suffocating void filled with a relentless loop of painful memories. By morning, he was spent, as though he had fought an invisible war all night. One particularly grueling night, he made a decision born of sheer desperation. He would seek professional help. That decision led him to a local therapist who specialized in helping people navigate the pain of betrayal. Daniel walked into the first session without expectations. The room felt stifling as he sat with his arms crossed, his answers to the therapist's questions clipped and terse. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was a pointless exercise. Frustration simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over, but the therapist remained calm, patient, and persistent. Slowly, something began to shift. The walls Daniel had so carefully constructed began to crack. He found himself speaking, haltingly at first, but more freely as the sessions continued. Each word felt like a release, the storm of emotions within him gradually losing its grip. The therapy didn't magically erase his pain or provide quick answers, but it offered him something invaluable, a place to face his buried feelings and the tools to begin rebuilding himself. Not long after starting therapy, Daniel joined a support group. Held in a modest room at the local community center, the weekly meetings brought together a small circle of people, each carrying their own stories of loss and betrayal. At first, Daniel lingered quietly at the back of the room, listening as others shared their experiences. A man spoke of his wife's battle with addiction. A woman recounted the devastation of a business partner's treachery. Though the details of their stories differed, the emotions resonated: grief, anger, loss, and the slow crawl toward healing. It was in this group that Daniel met Eleanor. She was reserved like him, but something about her demeanor, a quiet warmth, drew him in. One evening after the meeting had ended, Daniel noticed Eleanor lingering near the door. Fighting his instinct to withdraw, he walked over. "Hi," he said awkwardly, his voice rough from disuse. "I've seen you here a few times." Eleanor's smile was small but genuine. "Yeah," she said softly. "I come every week. It helps. A little." Daniel nodded, unsure of what to say next. For so long he had avoided letting anyone get close, but there was something about Eleanor that made the thought less daunting. "Would you want to grab a coffee?" she asked, her tone casual but tinged with a hint of nervousness. "I've been wanting to talk to someone, and I thought, why not now?" He hesitated. The idea of connecting with someone felt foreign, almost frightening, but the alternative, endless isolation, was unbearable. After a moment's pause, he nodded. "Yeah, coffee sounds good." They left the community center together, walking to a nearby cafe. Once seated across from one another, Eleanor broke the silence. "What brought you to the group?" she asked gently, her eyes steady but kind. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, unsure where to begin. "I'm just trying to figure things out," he admitted. "Trying to move forward, but it feels impossible. Life isn't anything like I thought it would be." Eleanor nodded, her expression filled with understanding. "I know the feeling," she said quietly. "My husband left me for someone else. It shattered me." As their conversation unfolded, Daniel felt an unexpected connection growing between them. For the first time in what seemed like ages, he didn't feel utterly alone in his pain. And perhaps, he thought, this was what healing looked like, the first fragile step toward rediscovering himself. Daniel never saw it coming. Sitting across from Eleanor, he watched her closely, noting the calm yet faintly worn look etched on her face. "How did you manage to pull through?" he asked after a long silence. She took a deliberate sip of her coffee before responding, her voice steady but laced with a quiet vulnerability. "At first I didn't," she said plainly. "I drank too much, pushed everyone away. For a while I wasn't really living, just getting by. Then I realized I couldn't stay in that place forever. I had to let go for my own sake." Her words hung in the air, and Daniel mulled them over, feeling their weight. He wanted to ask more, to uncover the strength she'd found to piece herself back together, but something held him back. Instead, he nodded slowly, his voice low as he confessed, "I'm still trying to figure that part out." Eleanor's eyes softened, filled with understanding. "It takes time," she assured him, "but you'll get there." That evening they talked for hours. As their stories unfolded, they resembled threads unraveling from a weathered tapestry. For the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel let himself open up. Eleanor listened with patience and a quiet kindness that made him feel truly heard. By the time they left the cafe, a faint but undeniable lightness had settled in his chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Over the following months, Daniel's life resumed its steady rhythm. His days were filled with the same routines, working at the hardware store, attending his weekly support group, but something inside him had shifted. He found himself looking forward to the moments he spent with Eleanor. Their bond grew slowly. They began meeting outside of group settings, sharing meals, strolling through the park, or simply talking about everything and nothing. These simple moments became the brightest parts of Daniel's week. Though he still kept much of himself hidden, Eleanor made it easier to lower his guard than he had expected. They didn't delve too deeply into their wounds, but every conversation felt like a small step forward, a careful balance between openness and self-preservation. Eleanor never pressured him to share more than he was comfortable with. Her patience and quiet understanding created a safe space for him, one where he could begin to heal. Daniel's pain didn't vanish overnight. It didn't fully disappear at all. But gradually, he began rebuilding the fractured pieces of himself. He relearned how to trust, not only others, but also his own ability to navigate life. Slowly, he allowed himself to hope for something that resembled wholeness. The life he envisioned wasn't perfect, but with Eleanor by his side in their quiet town, it felt like it could be enough. For the first time in years, he believed that starting over was possible. Those early days of his healing journey had been brutal. Progress came slowly, and often it felt like taking one step forward and two steps back. But Eleanor's unwavering presence made all the difference. She wasn't like Addison, who had dazzled him with grand promises only to leave him grasping at air. Eleanor was grounded, steady, and genuinely invested in understanding him. She bore her own scars from loss and never pretended everything was fine when it wasn't. Her honesty about her struggles became a source of comfort for Daniel, a reminder that he wasn't alone in his pain. He often thought back to one of their first meaningful conversations outside the group, a moment that still resonated deeply. It had been a tough week, and they'd arranged to meet for lunch at a modest diner on the corner. When Daniel arrived, he felt weighed down by the shadows of his past. His mind was a fog, his body heavy with exhaustion. But when he saw Eleanor seated at their usual booth, her warm, inviting smile waiting for him, something inside him softened. "Hey," she greeted him gently. "How are you holding up?" Sliding into the seat across from her, Daniel sighed. His face showed the weariness he carried. "I'm getting through," he replied. "Work's been rough, but manageable." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, her gaze steady and full of empathy. Sometimes it's not the work itself, she said, but the weight of what we're carrying behind us. For a moment, Daniel met her eyes. There was no need to explain further. She understood in a way that words couldn't express. He nodded, unable to find the right response. "What was it like?" Eleanor asked after a pause, her voice soft but curious. "Before everything changed?" He hesitated, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest. Taking a deep breath, he let the words come slowly. "It felt like I was doing everything right," he admitted, his voice heavy with the unspoken. The silence between them deepened, filled with a quiet understanding that didn't demand more than he could give. "I poured myself into the pursuit of being a diligent worker, a supportive husband, and a devoted father. I believed sheer determination could hold everything together. But even the strongest effort can't sustain a home if its foundation is giving way." Eleanor took a deliberate sip of her coffee, her expression calm, yet introspective. "No, it can't," she agreed softly. "But that doesn't mean it's all on you, Daniel. Not everything is your burden to bear." Her words resonated deeply, and Daniel found himself staring at his hands, surprised by the solace her understanding brought. That day, their conversation unfolded for hours. It wasn't surface-level chatter or polite small talk. It was genuine. They peeled back their defenses, sharing their struggles, their scars, and their dreams of a brighter tomorrow. As their dialogue deepened, Daniel sensed the stirrings of a fragile hope taking root within him. Slowly but surely, their connection grew stronger. They began spending time together in quiet, restorative ways. They wandered through forest trails, explored the charm of small nearby towns on peaceful weekends, and spent leisurely afternoons lost in books at the park. These moments brought Daniel a newfound tranquility in the simplicity of their days. Eleanor never imposed on him or asked for more than he could give. She honored his need for solitude when he sought it, and stood by him with unwavering presence when he reached out. It was effortless, untainted by the weight of expectation, and that changed everything. One evening, as they worked side by side in the kitchen preparing dinner, the moment felt almost sacred in its stillness. Eleanor turned to him, her expression tender and her lips curving into a faint smile as she stirred the soup. "You know," she said quietly, "I never imagined my life would look like this. I didn't think I'd remarry, or that I'd find someone who truly understood the pain I've carried." Daniel met her gaze, his heart heavy with past sorrow but full of gratitude. "I didn't expect it either," he admitted. "I thought my story was over, that there was nothing left to look forward to. But then I met you, and I realized there's more, something better than what I thought I'd lost." Her smile grew warmer, and she stepped closer, taking his hand in hers. "I'm so glad we found each other." Daniel felt a wave of emotion tighten his chest. In that instant, he knew he was ready to embrace love again and share his future with Eleanor. His proposal wasn't elaborate or theatrical. There were no grand proclamations or extravagant gestures. It happened on a quiet evening, just the two of them by the fireplace. The flames danced softly as Daniel took a steadying breath. "Eleanor," he began, his voice trembling under the weight of weeks spent gathering his courage. Though he was certain of his feelings, the enormity of the moment was undeniable. Sensing his hesitation, Eleanor placed her hand over his, her tone reassuring. "Take your time. You don't have to say anything until you're ready." "No," Daniel replied firmly, his voice finding its strength. "I am ready. I don't need a big show. I just need you to know that I love you and want to spend the rest of my life with you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "Daniel, this hasn't been easy for either of us. We've both carried so much. But I want to move forward, with you." With trembling hands, Daniel produced a simple ring from his pocket, holding it out to her. "Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as Eleanor nodded, her radiant smile giving her answer before her words did. "Yes." Their kiss sealed the moment, filling it with quiet hope and boundless possibility. The wedding that followed was modest, a gathering of close family and a few cherished friends from the support group that had become a second family to them. There was no opulence, no grandeur, but none was needed. The day was a celebration of love born from resilience, of healing shared by two hearts, and of a promise to move forward together. As Eleanor walked down the aisle to a gentle melody, Daniel's chest swelled with emotion. This wasn't the wedding he had once envisioned in his youth, but it was infinitely better, authentic, profound, and full of meaning. When it came time for their vows, Daniel's voice was steady, each word carrying the weight of his truth. "I promise to stand by you," he said, his gaze locked unwaveringly on hers. Their vows were simple yet deeply profound, anchoring them to the life they were building together, one step at a time. Amid moments of serenity and chaos, I pledge to cherish you, trust you, and love you for who you are today and who you will become. Eleanor's voice quivered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I promise to love you, Daniel," she said, her voice steady with emotion, "to remain patient, forgiving, and unwavering in my support, no matter where life may lead us." With those tender words, they sealed their vows and became husband and wife. Time moved forward, carrying them into their shared future. Shortly after the wedding, Eleanor delivered life-altering news. One quiet evening as they relaxed together after dinner, she gently placed her hand on Daniel's. "Daniel," she began softly, her voice full of warmth, "I'm pregnant." The words lingered in the air like an unexpected melody. Daniel froze, his thoughts scrambling to catch up. "Pregnant?" he echoed in disbelief, her face lit up with an infectious radiance. "Twins!" she added, her joy unmistakable. In that moment, Daniel felt his world tilt. The emptiness he had long carried within began to dissolve, replaced by the faint, unfamiliar glow of hope. For the first time in years, happiness felt possible. As the months passed, their lives were consumed by preparations for parenthood. From choosing nursery colors to debating baby names, their days became a whirlwind of plans and possibilities. Daniel, who had never envisioned himself as a father, found comfort in the simple rituals of assembling cribs and folding tiny clothes. A quiet contentment settled over him, soothing wounds he had thought were permanent. Yet, even as joy filled their home, a persistent unease gnawed at Daniel's peace. He couldn't shake the dread that his past might resurface to shatter this newfound stability. Memories of Addison, Aurora, and the man who had been with Addison loomed in his thoughts, haunting his quiet moments. He feared they might reemerge, bringing chaos to the fragile happiness he had built. One day, his fears came to life. While Eleanor attended a doctor's appointment with her mother, a knock echoed through their home. When Daniel opened the door, a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit stood before him. The man's face was unfamiliar, but his poised demeanor sent a jolt of recognition through Daniel. "I'm looking for Daniel Peterson," the man announced, his tone brisk and formal. Daniel's chest tightened as his pulse quickened. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice edged with suspicion. "I work for a private investigator," the man replied. "Your ex-wife, Addison, has hired us. She says there are unresolved matters that require your attention." Daniel stood frozen, his worst fears confirmed. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, but a steely determination took hold. Without a word, he shut the door firmly in the man's face. For the first time in years, he refused to let his past define him. He turned away and resolved not to look back. Meanwhile, Addison and Aurora's lives had unraveled in Daniel's absence. The stability they had once taken for granted had disintegrated. The comfort, the security, the home they had relied upon, everything was gone. Addison had pinned her hopes on Elijah, her lover, trusting his promises of luxury and ease. But when the money she had siphoned from Daniel's accounts ran dry, Elijah vanished as swiftly as he had appeared, leaving nothing but empty words and crushing debt in his wake. At first, Addison clung to denial, convinced she could salvage their lives. She believed another opportunity, another lifeline, was just around the corner. But no salvation came. Her dwindling savings vanished, swallowed by the lifestyle she fought desperately to maintain. Miami, once her dream escape, now stood as a harsh reminder of all she had lost. Aurora, too, bore the weight of their downfall. College became an impossible goal, and she was forced to drop out when she could no longer afford tuition. Her dreams faded, replaced by the harsh reality of long hours at a dilapidated coffee shop. The job barely paid enough to survive, but it was her only option. The strain of their new reality fractured the bond between mother and daughter. Once close, Addison and Aurora now found themselves locked in a cycle of blame and resentment. Addison, consumed by her guilt and failures, lashed out at Aurora, accusing her of not contributing enough. Aurora, in turn, resented her mother for the choices that had led to their downfall. Each argument deepened the divide between them, leaving their relationship in shambles. They had nothing, no money, no hope, and no one they could turn to. But somehow their lives took an unexpected turn when they encountered Daniel. His world, once chaotic, had become almost unrecognizably serene. His modest, unpretentious home was his sanctuary, a stark contrast to the storm of betrayal and unrest he had left behind. Daniel had carved out a quiet existence, finding comfort in its steady rhythm. With Eleanor by his side, he was rebuilding his life, piece by piece. For the first time, he felt a profound sense of peace, a release from the turmoil that had once consumed him. But on one otherwise ordinary Thursday, the tranquility he had nurtured was interrupted by an unexpected knock at his door. Expecting nothing more than a delivery or a familiar face, he opened it. Standing there were Addison and Aurora, figures from a past he had worked hard to bury. Addison's disheveled appearance told a story of hardship. Her makeup smeared, her clothes wrinkled and mismatched, her eyes bloodshot from countless sleepless nights. She clutched her bag tightly, as though it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Behind her, Aurora's pale face glistened with fresh tears, a visible testament to her distress. "Daniel," Addison began, her voice quivering, heavy with emotion. "Please, hear me out. We've been through hell. I've been through hell. Her voice faltered, breaking under the weight of her words. "I'm so sorry." Her confession tumbled out, raw and hesitant. "I made terrible mistakes. I was blind, selfish. I didn't realize what I had until I lost it." She searched his face for some trace of compassion, but Daniel's expression remained impassive. He felt no anger toward her anymore, nor sorrow, just a hollow indifference. Undeterred, Addison took a shaky step forward, her desperation spilling into her voice. "I love you, Daniel. I never stopped loving you. Please, let me explain. Let me make things right." Before Daniel could react, Aurora spoke, her voice soft and trembling. "Dad, please," she implored, stepping forward timidly. Her tear-streaked face mirrored her remorse. "I was stupid. I didn't understand the hurt I caused you. I never wanted to push you away. I'm so sorry. Please give us another chance." Daniel stood unmoving, their words washing over him like distant echoes. He had imagined this moment countless times, yet he felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only detachment. Their pain was unmistakable, yet he remained unaffected, as if the emotions they carried were meant for someone else entirely. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice low and even, carrying a weight that made Addison flinch. "Now you're sorry?" he asked, his tone edged with quiet disbelief. "After everything? After the insults, Aurora? After calling me a loser dad? Where was all this regret then?" His words cut like a blade. Addison staggered as if the air had been knocked out of her, and Aurora froze, her face drained of any color. Addison's trembling hands wiped futilely at the tears streaming down her cheeks. "Daniel," I beg you, she murmured, her voice breaking as she collapsed to her knees. I'll do whatever it takes. Just let us try. Let us make this right. Her sobs came in heaving waves, unfiltered and raw. I regret it all, she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her grief. Every single day. Aurora edged closer, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Dad, she pleaded, her words barely audible. We've lost everything. We have no one left. Please don't give up on us now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But Daniel didn't move. His silence stood as an unyielding barrier, the space between them heavy with the burden of their shared history. The mistakes they had made lingered like shadows, impossible to escape. And in that charged stillness, he offered them no answers, only the quiet echo of their own regrets. His gaze was cold and unwavering, the hardened resolve of a man who had weathered too much to falter now. Every trial, every sacrifice he had endured, had brought him to this defining moment. His life was no longer theirs to claim. Whatever choices they had made, they were theirs alone to bear, and he had no intention of shouldering their burden any longer. He exhaled deeply, his piercing stare locked on them. You've made your decisions, he said, his voice steady but unyielding. You made them together and now you'll live with them. I'm done cleaning up the mess you've created. Addison's sobs became uncontrollable as she clung to his arm, her grip desperate, as though her touch alone could change his mind. Daniel, please, she pleaded, her voice quivering with raw emotion. I love you. I made a mistake, I know I did, but I can't go on like this. Please, give us another chance. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Daniel pulled his arm free in a sharp, deliberate motion, his expression firm and resolute. No, he replied without hesitation. You don't get to play the victim now. You've had chance after chance. This is the reality you created. Addison collapsed inward, her head bowing low, sobs racking her body. Beside her, Aurora stood still, tears cascading silently down her cheeks. Her lips moved as if to speak, but no sound escaped. Daniel, however, felt nothing. The door before him symbolized a threshold he would never again cross. The man who had once fought so hard to hold this family together was gone, replaced by someone who had learned the strength of letting go. He cast one last glance at the two women who had once been his entire world. Addison and Aurora, now only reminders of a life he had left behind. His mind shifted to Eleanor, to the twins they were expecting, and to the new life he had built from the ashes of his past. Without a word, he turned and shut the door behind him. The click of the latch was resolute, final. From the other side, the muffled cries of Addison and Aurora faded into obscurity, absorbed by the solid door now separating them. Daniel's choice was unshakable, his patience and forgiveness depleted after years of betrayal and disillusionment. There was no going back. Time moved on, and Daniel flourished. The pain of old wounds softened, replaced by the joy of a life rebuilt with purpose and love. With Eleanor by his side and the twins filling their home with laughter and delightful chaos, Daniel found a peace he once thought unattainable. He embraced the vibrant rhythm of his days, the twins' infectious giggles, their endless energy, and the loving disorder that defined their home. It was a stark contrast to the suffocating loneliness he had once endured, convinced he had lost everything. Each morning began in partnership with Eleanor. She brewed the coffee while he prepared their children's lunches, their movements effortlessly synchronized, a reflection of their shared goals. Their bond deepened with each challenge they faced, built on a foundation of trust and understanding. Their modest home became a sanctuary, a place of stability, love, and unshakable faith in each other. It was everything Daniel had once longed for, but had never found in his old life. Meanwhile, Addison and Aurora's world unraveled. The life of comfort and privilege they had taken for granted disintegrated, leaving them adrift in the wreckage of their choices. Time and regret etched lines into Addison's face, her once radiant beauty replaced by the weary marks of guilt and loss. The pursuit of fleeting pleasures had left her with nothing enduring. She struggled to rebuild, turning to fleeting relationships in search of solace, but nothing lasted. No one could replace what she had so carelessly thrown away. Her days became a monotonous cycle of regret, spent in a shabby apartment far removed from the luxury she once knew. In the early years, she tried to reconnect with Daniel, reaching out repeatedly, but her efforts were met with silence. Regret became her constant companion, a heavy weight she would carry for the rest of her life, knowing that she had squandered something irreplaceable. Unopened letters marked the end of the line. Elijah, the man Addison once imagined as her escape to a life of opulence and ease, had disappeared without a trace the moment their finances evaporated. There was nothing left to cushion her fall. Addison felt betrayed, not by anyone else, but by her own reflection. Once lithe and elegant, she now saw in herself the weariness of years lost and regrets that had etched themselves deeply into her features. Her once lustrous hair had thinned, her vitality all but vanished. Exhaustion became her constant companion, and each visit to the doctor only confirmed what she feared. She had wasted too many years chasing illusions. Meanwhile, Aurora, the daughter with such a bright future ahead, had dropped out of college after her father's financial backing disappeared. For Aurora, staying in school without resources was an impossibility. The dream of a secure and fulfilling life unraveled, leaving her trapped in a dead-end job. Each shift she spent cleaning office buildings felt like another chapter in a life she'd never wanted. With every mop dragged across the floor and every trash can emptied, Aurora couldn't help but relive the choices that had brought her to this point. Her mother's actions had robbed her of not only stability, but also hope. Resentment grew inside Aurora, a tangled mix of anger toward her absent father, frustration at herself for believing in their facade for so long, and bitterness toward Addison. Addison's poor decisions had dragged them into this cycle of loss and deception. Aurora had tried on rare occasions to bridge the gap between them, but their conversations were tense, shallow, and inadequate to heal the rift. Eventually, even those efforts ceased. The fragile bond between mother and daughter unraveled completely, leaving Aurora to walk away for good. Addison was left alone to face the wreckage of her life. As for Daniel, he had moved forward without a second glance. The family he had once cherished, the one he'd poured himself into, was beyond repair. Daniel had felt the sting of loss deeply, but refused to let it define him. Over time, he found clarity. He realized that his life wasn't dictated by others' betrayals, but by the decisions he chose to make for himself. Bitterness no longer had a hold on him. Instead, he directed his energy toward building a new life with Eleanor and their children. The past still lingered in fragmented memories, arguments, broken promises, shattered trust, but he had stripped them of their power to control him. Healing was slow, but it came nonetheless. One balmy summer evening, Daniel stood in his backyard, watching a scene that filled him with a profound sense of peace. Eleanor knelt in the grass, laughing with their twin children as they played. Their joy rang out in the evening air, wrapping him in a sense of belonging he hadn't thought he'd ever feel again. A smile touched Daniel's lips as he took in the moment. For the first time in years, he felt whole. His children had become the center of his world. The pride he felt as he watched them grow, and the love he carried for them were untouched by the pain of his past. The twins ran toward Eleanor, their tiny hands reaching for her as she scooped them up with ease. "I love you," Eleanor said softly, her eyes shining as she turned to look at him. Daniel walked over and joined her on the grass, his heart full. The twins clambered onto his lap, their small hands tugging at his shirt. He wrapped his arms around them, their warmth a tangible reminder of how far he'd come. "I love you too," he said, his voice steady, the words filled with meaning. It was a simple phrase, but it held the weight of everything he valued now. The past had shaped him, yes, but it no longer defined him. His focus was here, in this present moment, with Eleanor and their children. Though scars of betrayal and regret lingered, they no longer had the power to harm him. His life now was one of purpose, love, and resilience. Across town, Addison sat alone in her dim apartment, staring out at the fading light of evening. Her health continued its relentless decline, a haunting reminder of the cost of her choices. Her body was a canvas of scars, each one a testament to years spent veering down the wrong path. Although she had sought redemption, the damage she had caused was irreparable. The life she once cherished had slipped through her fingers, taking with it the love of the man who had once meant everything to her. She had tried to reconnect with Aurora, clinging to a fragile hope, but her daughter had shut the door firmly and decisively. Aurora's tolerance for her mother had long since worn thin, and Addison was left with nothing. No explanations that could mend the rift, no reasons that could bridge the chasm. Now, she stood isolated, a ghost of her former self, haunted by the consequences of her own actions. Yet Aurora had her own scars to bear. Cutting ties with her mother had given her an illusion of control, but it had also trapped her in a loop of unresolved anger and lingering sorrow. By pushing Addison away, Aurora had also lost the one person who had once been her closest ally. Now bitterness was her only solace. The past was a story written in stone, immutable and heavy, pressing on her every waking moment. Addison had tried to rebuild, to piece together the fragments of a shattered life, but the echoes of her choices followed her relentlessly. The future she had once dreamed of was irretrievably lost, and she could blame no one but herself. Elsewhere, in the tranquil embrace of his backyard, Daniel stood surrounded by his family, a contrast to Addison's solitude. The laughter of his children filled the air, untainted by pain, and he reflected on how the trials of the past had shaped him. The sting of betrayal had left its mark, but it had also forged him into someone stronger, someone who had found resilience in the face of despair. Though the scars of his past would never completely fade, Daniel had discovered a way to move forward. His redemption didn't lie in apologies from those who had hurt him, but in the life he had created with Eleanor. The love they shared was his sanctuary, a quiet but profound form of closure. In that love he found peace, a steady, enduring justice that no pain could ever erase. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.